So thank you so much for joining us today for our Rivet Power Hour. We'll be discussing common pitfalls in professional learning. And my colleague Jocelyn and I are so excited to have with us today Shama Thompson from Instruction Partners, who is an extremely experienced educator and overall lovely person. And so your hosts for today are myself, I'm Claire Rivero, not Annie Morrison. That may be confusing to you. Sorry, using Annie's Zoom here, and I failed to change the name, but Claire Rivero, Director of Communications. And Jocelyn, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Richardson. I'm the manager for the Professional Learning Partner Guide here at Rivet, which we will talk about a little bit later. And I'm so happy to see you all. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, great. So, and we'll introduce Shama a little bit more in just a second, but the impetus for this topic on today's Rivet Power Hour was actually Instruction Partners blog from a few months ago. And when we read it here at Rivet, we saw these 4 pitfalls as they were articulated in the blog and felt like they really hit spot on what we see happening in districts across the country. That these challenges occur year after year, even with very experienced and thoughtful district and state leadership and professional learning external provider support. So we're going to have a chance to dig into these pitfalls and see what we can do to try and mitigate them in the future. So let's see here. Let's go to the goals for today's session. We are going to discuss the 4 common pitfalls, and we're going to discuss how the pitfalls can be avoided and how you can get back on track. And then we're going to share a few resources to support you in this work. And now I'm going to try and launch another poll here, which I think I can't do when I am sharing my screen. So sorry about this. Let me just quickly launch this poll. We're curious about just how many times people have been with us for Rivet Power Hours. Let me launch this. So if you can do this poll as well, we're just curious about your familiarity with Rivet Power Hours and with our organizations. Great, so it looks like, ooh, majority, this is your first time. That's great. Oh, nope, we're evening out. All right, well, it looks like still majority of people first time, and a couple of folks with some experience. Fantastic. Okay, so let me reshare my screen. All right. So as I mentioned, we have with us today Shama Thompson, who is the Executive Director of Design, Professional Learning, and Support for Instruction Partners. And Shama is an extremely accomplished educator with lots of diverse experiences. So you've been a teacher, an instructional coach, school leader, college professor, and supporter of both master's and doctoral students. And Shama, one of the most exciting things about your bio to me was is it your doctoral dissertation that you referenced? Yeah. So Shama, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your doctoral dissertation and sort of learnings that have come from it that relate to professional learning.
Yeah, thanks so much, Claire and Jocelyn, for having me. And thanks to all of you out here who put together some time and space to come out and enjoy our conversation. And for those of you who are watching this, if it is recorded, when that recording comes out. My doctoral dissertation looked at exploring the instructional practices, beliefs, and attitudes of pre-service teachers and their professors when supporting U.S. Ebonics speakers inside early literacy classrooms. And so you can imagine that that is a woozy of a doozy of a thing to explore, but it was really something important for me as a U.S. Ebonics speaker myself and a former early childhood education teacher of really identifying what are the instructional practices and beliefs that we have to be able to support U.S. Ebonics speakers. And there are some clear phonics to phonics supports that we could have. And oftentimes U.S. Ebonics speakers are receiving cultural interventions instead of instructional interventions that allow them to feel affirmed in their language that is both formal and informal, like every language is, and be seen as a multilingual learner asset that they truly do bring into the classrooms inside of that space. And so you can imagine that there are direct correlations between what happens when we have more knowledge, what happens when we have more practice, what happens when things are aligned. And so as teachers, we are better prepared to ensure that all of our students are being able to learn and grow together. And as folks who are supporting teachers, we are not negating a demographic of human as well. So if you're interested in that, feel free to add that in the Q&A box and I'll follow up later. But I know we have a lot of great things today to talk about when it comes to the common pitfalls. So I'll pass it back over to you, Claire and Jocelyn, to kick us off.
Thanks, Shama. All righty, Jocelyn, are you going to, take us away?
All of these things on my screen, I could not reach the unmute button. All right, so I have some scenarios that I've encountered in the past as a former teacher, as a former instructional coach, as a former external provider. So I would love for you to talk more about these, just to kind of help us, avoid these pitfalls and kind of understand what's really going on behind the scenes. And so my first scenario, okay. So as an external partner, sometimes, you work with a district, and in my case, I was working with 2 schools. We were brought in under a previous administration who shared the same goals as our organization for math instruction. However, the following year, there were new district leaders and leadership at both schools, and we found that everyone had a different vision for math instruction. And so there was major misalignment between the 2 buildings that I work with. And so it was challenging to really support implementing math teaching practices and curricula because everyone was on a different page. And so my question for you is, really, if you could talk more about just any additional insight into that common situation. So I know we weren't unique, but also about setting an instructional vision and why that's important. And also some things that, you have seen as well when not having that concrete instructional vision from the beginning, when that's not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Your experience is one that we definitely see and experience on multiple sides, as partners coming in externally, as people who are also in the district working towards navigating so much change. And when we implement new curriculum, that is a massive complex change, right? And a part of that is, do we have a clarified vision that we can unite folks around? And so being able to understand, yes, we know that vision and misalignment happens. And when that happens, there is this disengagement. There becomes this really intense frustration within folks who are trying to implement. And that has long-term consequences as well, both for instructional practices, but also even the curriculum that are attached to those instructional practices. And so when we think about really setting those instructional visions up for whether I'm at a state level, whether I'm at a district level, whether I'm at a school level, the importance of us being able to know that that is our destination for where we are going. It tells us exactly what we want to see teachers and students and content and curriculum doing. And it's going to be the driver and guide for how we make decisions, how we interrupt, how we mitigate, how we problem solve. And when those things are disjointed, other things become disjointed, and there becomes pathways for folks to problem solve in ways that might not actually be aligned, but be a part of what they want to be true right now, which is supporting students to be able to do the best that they can do. And so I agree with you on understanding that the lack of a concrete vision creates some disjointing happening around the implementation of a variety of things. I think what we see to be true is when we can get together to say, what do we really want to be true with how students are experiencing math, early literacy, science, CTE, whatever that is, then we can start to orient from there around, okay, what does the rest of our structures and conditions that we kind of mentioned in our blog, how do we actually build those conditions? The visions are the seeds. So if I don't have the seeds, the conditions won't be able to grow in an aligned way, which means we create environments that don't allow for folks to be able to thrive in. And we don't actually want that to happen intentionally, but are some unintentional consequences. So leveraging resources to be able to make sure we have those visions are going to be really imperative for us to make sure we're having the conversation, whether that's a misalignment or a clarity conversation, and then working as problem solvers alongside the folks who really do hold the vision for what they want to be true for instruction in their spaces.
And Shama, can I ask a follow-up question about this, getting sort of everyone, getting some buy-in, getting everyone on the same page? I think the reality is that whether we're, in a district leader or a state leader or a PL provider, we often experience sort of a push and pull at the beginning, particularly at the beginning of implementing a new curriculum, where there isn't necessarily 100% buy-in with the new curriculum. Either they thought a different curriculum should have been adopted, they didn't want to change the curriculum. What recommendation, and Jocelyn, I feel like you as well, who worked in this role of getting people on the same page, do you have recommendations for how to get people all having at least some element of buy-in to start working towards these common goals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing we have to do is hear people's experience. And sometimes that's not what we want to hear. Sometimes what I want to say is this beautiful thing in a box with a bow on it, and that's not the experience, right? And so to understand where that person perceives it went wrong at, so that when we can acknowledge it, that might be something that we can bridge. It might be something that's just going to be a difference that we have to name and moving forward, and then being able to anchor back to what the priority is. A lot of times folks are talking similar outcomes in different languages. And so being able to actually understand, if we were to close our eyes and envision that, what would we want to be true for students? What would we want students to do? We want them to collaborate. We want them to have open-ended conversations. We want them to think rigorous around this like text. So sometimes how we name it is actually what the argument could be. Sometimes it's not, and it is different, but oftentimes it is like, we actually do want these things, but how do we get there? So we can get the vision on paper, so we can then get to the process, which are all the other pieces that come alongside, and without the vision become even disjointed, because now you're trying to get folks in alignment and in formation, but we're all operating towards different visions. So the first thing I think we have to do is truly openly hear and listen out for folks, and solicit those dissenting opinions so that we can then create a more holistic plan of diverse stakeholders when we do get to that space of creating a more shared vision. Jocelyn, what would you add?
Yeah, I think that's great. Yes, getting everyone's hearing their like thoughts and ideas and their experiences, right? Because sometimes it can seem that like teachers are complaining or our staff are complaining when there's really a legit issue. And so I would just co-sign what you said. It just listening, having that space for them to share some of the implementation issues, some of the needs, some of the desires. If there is a concern with current curriculum, or why is that? And then going back to that instructional vision as well. I mean, that's school district instructional vision of like, if there is a concern with the newly adopted curriculum, like how this curricula fits in with our with their instructional vision as a district. And so, yeah, having that open space and just continuing to get that teacher buy-in through those conversations, and having different staff engaged in the process. And if you're adopting new curriculum, every step of the way, is to get that buy-in, is a way to get that buy-in as well.
Yeah, great. Well, I don't remember who said this, but the takeaway phrase that's sticking with me now is solicit dissenting opinions. So I think that is just so valuable to be able to consistently reach out to people who seem like they may not have full buy-in yet, and to understand how far apart are we? Maybe not far apart at all. And I think your point there, Shama, was about getting concrete, getting nitty-gritty about like, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want to see in class, what happening in classrooms, and realizing that there actually is a lot of already common alignment toward the instructional vision, just maybe using different language. It kind of reminds me of the conversations and debates that were happening with Common Core several years ago, when states would, put the standards up and have people actually comment standard by standard, like, do you think this one is good as is? How do you think it needs to be tweaked? And really getting concrete about what they want to see at each grade level for students, because no one knows the students and the needs better than the people who are working with them day to day. So that's great. Thank you. So let's see, we have some resources here. Shama, do you want to introduce? We have a couple of resources from instruction partners that can support in this work.
Yeah, we have some visioning tools here that just kind of help us get to when we are creating visions, not only for just instruction, but the different structures that would support us getting to that vision, right? That journey that journey towards the destination, excuse me. And so we have the visioning for collaborative planning, which walks you by in a step-by-step format of, we know collaborative planning plays a huge role in getting us to that outcome and that vision that we want to be true. Creating spaces for teachers to be able to learn and understand and practice together. And then that observation and feedback piece of like, how do we progress monitor through that observation and feedback of like, yes, we did this in collaborative planning. How do we actually see if it is landing and how it is landing in relationship to the vision that we have? And so we have two tools that can just help walk you through setting up visions for those spaces in alignment to getting to that overall vision that you have for your instructional outcomes.
Ah, great. Yeah. So building towards the overall, these are like more specific components. Super smart. And then we have, I think, a more overarching vision setting blog post and associated resource. And this blog post actually just came out last week from our Director of Partnerships, Robin McClellan, who is supporting a lot of districts in this vision setting work and also lived it as a leader. She articulated in her blog really how this is the grounding, and it helps all of these other pieces fall into place, and really helps with priority setting, making decisions once you have a concrete vision and buy-in with that vision, how it really smooths the path that follows. And associated with that is this instructional vision resource doc. And she outlines in her blog post a couple of steps to take to do that vision setting work. And then this resource doc has some associated support resources to help with that work as well. All right.
So next scenario, a school community selected and adopted a new math curriculum, and teachers did the training from the curriculum provider over the summer, and they were really excited to start using the materials with students. However, when school started, they used weekly planning protocols that didn't use the same language as the curriculum, while receiving the feedback from leaders that was at odds with the curriculum's intended design. And so my questions for you would be, thank you, Claire. Then if you could just kind of talk about why content-specific PD in the publisher's initial training is not always sufficient, and then also what does curriculum specific PD look like in addition to those things? How is it different than those things?
Yeah, absolutely. And something that we all experience, and a pitfall that we can definitely fall into and get out. When I think about this, I think about how we used to travel. You guys remember MapQuest? Like, you remember printing out the MapQuest directions and like having them, like I remember like having them folded and keeping them really tight and then like unfolding them and trying to figure out like if I was on the right road or not. And there's like a thing that I was talking to my niece around, and she was like, well, what's a MapQuest? And why would you do that if you had GPS? And I was like, well, friend, things have changed quite a bit. And when I think about this question, it makes me think about that visual of in MapQuest, it tells me where I'm going to go. It tells me one direction underneath ideal conditions, right? It has no idea if there's a detour, if there's a roadblock of any sort of kind. I moved to Texas recently, and there's always a detour or a roadblock on a massive highway that you get lost in. And so when we think about the publisher's training, it really is giving us an understanding of the nuts and bolts of those of the pieces that are in there. It's going to give us the structure, it's going to give us the routine, and it's going to give us the execution and implementation of that in ideal conditions. Sometimes though, the ideal conditions are ours, and oftentimes they are not. And so really thinking through that curriculum specific PD, which anchors it. Not only is it like, it's like the GG is what I call Google Maps. It's like the updated version that can give you any type of movement around, not the one that comes with your car, because sometimes you have to sync that and get that upgraded to match, but it's really thinking through the instructional practices. And so it's thinking through, yes, in the curriculum, this is the format, this is the structure. When I take that curriculum, I look at the specific instructional practices and the content in our students and our school, what is the type of learning that we need to engage in to make sure that we can implement for what is best for our state. So it's a very much so Met Gala version of a gown. And we want to make sure that in that curriculum specific PD, we're looking at how we are taking into action the instructional strategies and then actually layering those in, thinking through what unfinished learning might be there or what kind of tweaks might be necessary for our students to be able to implement. I think that's the biggest difference. It is not that the training is just insufficient, but alone by itself, it is going to be insufficient because it won't give you the real-time updates that you need to be looking through and practicing to make sure that the drive is as pleasant as it could be.
Yeah, I like that sort of, you've got a lot of good analogies in there. I don't know which one I liked best, but I think sort of my takeaway was the sort of like layering of the support, because I think it's very possible. And I think we all have known of experiences where it's content specific professional learning, but not curriculum specific. And it is really powerful. It gives you some really powerful instructional practice strategies and ways of teaching and understanding student need, but then it's layering that, and it just sort of makes the professional learning more efficient when you can layer it on top of the actual curriculum and the needs of the students specific to that curriculum.
And real time and relevant, right? Like folks who are experiencing this are often in frustration because of this disconnect between how is it going to fit in my context. And so really being able to frame our curriculum specific based PD to like help people understand that that is a challenge. Like we don't have to pretend that challenges don't exist with implementing high quality instructional material. They do. This is one way that we mitigate this challenge of you feeling that you do not have the instructional practices needed for what that implementation is going to look like.
So we have a couple of resources to share to help support the sort of the setting up of curriculum-based professional learning, and sort of doing an analysis of what's happening in your district right now and seeing if it does align with these best practices. And one of those is the framework for curriculum-based professional learning, and that's one of Rivet's tools. And we've recently updated it just last month. And so it outlines I'm going to show them on the next screen in just a moment, the characteristics of professional learning, times when you can expect professional learning to really be effective, and really gives you that overall view of what the learning should be looking like in your district. And then Shama, do you want to talk about the curriculum study protocol and its role in this work?
Yeah, this protocol really allows us to sit together and start to think through the initial understandings and designs of the curriculum itself. And that's going to inform really key implementation decisions that are going to be made later on. It allows for participants in this kind of meeting and step back to walk away with a deeper understanding, not just of how the curriculum is intended to be used, but also the potential implications and implementations, which we know is the goal once we leave understanding that overall curriculum itself.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Jocelyn, do you want to briefly talk about, yeah, there you go. You can control my screen. Great.
Sorry, y'all. So I'll talk briefly about the Professional Learning Partner Guide. And it's the guide that I oversee. And so if you are unfamiliar with Rivet, this is our flagship a product. This is the one that started it all. And so you can come to this website and search for a curriculum-based providers that provides curriculum-based professional learning to meet your district's or school's needs. And so you just start your provider search. Right now we have about 50 providers. You can see we have publishers, nonprofit organizations. We have lots of different providers, including instruction partners. And so you can just go and search on our website, and then you can look by curriculum. You can look see the different types of professional learning support they offer. So are you launching a curriculum? Are you needing someone to support you with the adoption and exploration phase? You can find a provider based on different filters on our website. And so, yeah, so just encourage you to use it if you haven't already, because we know that, preparing for the upcoming year starts early. And so, our guide can really support you with finding a provider that meets your needs.
And Jocelyn, not to put you on the spot, but hopefully maybe this is top of mind since you're overseeing the review process for new providers that's about to be launched. As you think about the professional learning providers as they apply to be in the Professional Learning Partner Guide, we have a team of reviewers that reviews them against a set of criteria that reflects this framework. Have you noticed trends in where providers typically struggle in terms of they typically struggle with this element of professional learning support, where you typically see strengths and weaknesses with providers?
Yeah, so one area is really integrating and making professional learning equity focus, curriculum-based professional learning equity focus, and also supporting students with disabilities and multilingual learners. So those will be some areas I think, not just with curriculum-based professional learning, but multiple types of professional learning where there are more supports needed.
All right, let's see here. Maybe I can think of, there we go. Okay, and then I mentioned, I was just going to briefly go over this component of our framework, which is this little pyramid model. And at the top, you see the traditional structures, just a reminder of how curriculum-based professional learning can look differently, be deployed within different PL structures. And then along the bottom, you see these characteristics that are then built out into this rubric against which the PLPG providers are evaluated. But at the high level, these are the components that you want to see present in strong curriculum-based professional learning. And I think the most interesting part of this, and just a key reminder, is this little middle blue bar about the different types of curriculum-based professional learning. So when you think about professional learning, I think so often you think about like, okay, we have the curriculum, and now we want to make sure that people are doing it well, which is very true and super important to have professional learning present at that time. But to also think about these other key moments in the implementation journey, which is as you are adopting a curriculum and then that first year, those first couple months of initial implementation, how important it is to have this layered, as Shama said, this layered type of professional learning, that it's just really key to getting you off on the right foot, to having that those instructional materials really take hold in the district, and really putting your energy into that learning at those early times. All right, scenario 3.
So one school adopted a new math curriculum, and as the weeks progressed, the instructional coach struggled with some issues, the teacher struggles with some issues, particularly with fitting instruction into their allotted lesson time. And so the instructional coach thought to use the PLC time to troubleshoot and collaborate around ways to use the curriculum more effectively to support student learning. But unfortunately, they never got around to it. Leadership asked the PLC teams to work through training materials on 3 different topics before the end of the first term: 1 on anti-bullying, 1 on increasing mathematical language, and 1 on best practices in cross-STEM skills. And so I was just wondering if you can talk more about preparation time and collaboration time. What does effective prep time look like? And then also, what role do leaders play in structuring collaborative time and prep time to avoid other priorities creeping in unrelated to implementation of the curriculum?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to take a breath on that, Jocelyn, because some of that was like you peeped into my history, and that might have been a time where I was leading something back in the day. And sometimes even recently, because time is we don't have enough of it. We could always use more time. We're always working within a limitation of time. And this is a real thing. And so if you are on this call, I am not here saying, just do this thing and magically all the time will come along for you to have it. If you have that, please send that to me, because I am looking for it as well. What I am here to say is, like, we understand that we have to allot specific time and we have to be intentional with that. And so as a leader, my role is ensuring that teachers have the same experience that we want kids to have, that they have the opportunity to truly go inside of a space together, to learn, to understand what is happening inside of a lesson, to be able to internalize that lesson, to be able to practice that lesson, to be able to get feedback on that before they were able to teach it with a set of students. That would be ideal, underneath ideal conditions. And so being able to hold and support that time is going to be really important as a leader, which forces us as leaders and district leaders to really start to look at, how do we schedule, and what are the innovative forms of scheduling? How do we get flexible scheduling? How do we get staggered scheduling along the way? And that supports the time for what has to happen. Now, I've seen districts get really specific, like unpack a unit internalization, then map out a scope and sequence of teacher learning on top of that unit internalization, right? Making sure that the way that we go about learning this quarter or this unit is going to be aligned to the outcomes of the unit itself. So that way the folks knew exactly what learning was happening and why it was happening. So therefore, we also could work really hard of knowing, why do we try to hold this one really, really, it's a sacred or non-touch, when we possibly can, whenever that is a possibility for us to be able to do. The more intentional we can get, the more we are on having it safeguarded, and not just like having other things creep in there when we know that those things have to happen. And so when we think about preparation, you're really thinking about, what is the prep time for teachers to be able to engage in their own learning around looking at a lesson, identifying what might be tricky, identifying how they might overcome those misconceptions, or planning inside of that. And then we're thinking through the conditions that would set that up. And some of those conditions are, what is the vision for the time that we have? Is the facilitator trained? Does the facilitator have their time to go through that lesson internalization, so they're able to actually center the questions that are probably most important? And that takes a lot of time in itself. And so I do believe that we are leaning into this as our organization, of like leaning into learning here, because this doesn't look one way. It depends on if your coach is the facilitator, depends on if there's somebody else that's the facilitator, if it's the grade level chair that is the facilitator. But what I do believe we have is this understanding that we're going to have to look at scheduling, and we're going to have intentional map scopes for learning on top of the unit learning, to ensure that curriculum-based professional learning is still anchored and centered, to ensure that we have a journey to go down that is more intentional along the way.
Yeah, I think this really underlines how important it is to have not only curriculum-based professional learning, but also role-specific professional learning, because there are so many things that need to just be, as a leader, you have so many competing priorities and things you're trying to balance within the district, and especially in the first year of implementation, making this switch to, I think the example kind of highlighted that, like, they had these sort of predetermined set of learning priorities, all of which were also important, like anti-bullying, cross-STEM skills. These are also very important, but they sort of like separate and sort of pre-planned from the work of implementing a new curriculum. And I feel like this is where role-specific PL can be so powerful for a partner to come in and support with leadership experience, to come in and support a leader on saying, like, as you implement a new curriculum, these are the things that you need to be conscious of as you begin to think about how to structure time, structural PLC time, protect time. Yeah.
I'll also add, our PLPG rubric is a great resource. If you are, Claire talked about the different role-specific professional learning. Well, one of the types of professional learning we evaluate for is systems design and leadership support, soon to be ongoing support for leaders. And so, just what are some of the things that you should be thinking about when leaders are being trained on implementation of new curricula in your district, and what ongoing supports do they need? So I would just encourage, if you are an LEA, to just encourage you to look at that PLPG rubric, to use it to see how you can strengthen your leadership, your professional learning for leaders as you implement your new curricula. And that is also located on the PLPG website. You can click on the PLPG rubric and look at the 4 types of PL we evaluate for, and just use that as a resource as you're planning professional learning in your district.
That's amazing. Just as if I was a person that was going to pull that out, what would be like the key look for or thinking question that you would want me to like look at that resource thinking about?
Yeah, so we have our overarching indicators, right, for each of our 4 types of professional learning. So those are like, is the professional learning designed for a specific audience or a specific grade band? Is it equitable, right? And so I would say, look at those things, but look at more specific things like what you talked about, like how, what time, what are some of the priorities? Like, is there time, given to help leaders plan, the scheduling and think about things that, how they would restructure different systems within their schools or districts? Is there, what time do you have to, talk about like, data analysis and how that looks, and different walkthrough tools and different evaluation tools as you are walking through classrooms. And so those are some of the areas that I would definitely look at, different systems that need to be changed, and how you restructure, time and restructure systems. And then also, like, how do you know whether or not it's effective? The PL is effective, or the curriculum is doing what we want the curriculum to do. And so looking at that data, different forms of data, right? Not just the standardized test scores or the curriculum, excuse me, curriculum embedded assessments, but that walkthrough data, interviews with teachers or surveys from teachers, student work, those types of things.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I just wanted to make sure that we all tease that, because I already got it bookmarked. I already got my notes over here. I hear all the gems coming out. We're all working collectively together. And that is so true. Like, oftentimes it's not that folks don't have the time, or we're not having the conversations, or there's no space in there. It is really thinking about, how are we intentionally like orienting towards it? What is that criteria for success for those spaces and times? And how can we restructure when we need to restructure? And some of that is like, maybe that goes into an email. Maybe that goes into a bulletin. Maybe that goes over here in a communication structure to be able to hold the time to be able to align to the criteria that we want to be true. So Jocelyn, thank you for dropping that one more click down for us to be able to say, not only is this a resource, but as we look at this resource, really thinking through the systems and the structures, whether we are a partner coming in to help people think about that, whether we are the decision maker that gets to make that decision on if it is this much time versus this much time, or whether we are like challenged in intention with, do we go down this priority or this priority, just to create that awareness that every decision has a yes and a no. And these are some tools to be able to help us just be more mindful and conscious about the decisions that we go in to make for time. So thank you, Jocelyn, for dropping that gem for us.
Yeah, and getting concrete about these shifts. I feel like this was actually from a different, one of the previous scenarios where they were getting feedback that was misaligned to their curriculum. So like getting as nitty gritty as like, okay, what observational rubric are we using? So I think sometimes you're like, okay, we're using a common one, so we're good. But then to make sure that the actual rubric itself is not providing feedback that is suddenly, now that you've adopted a new curriculum, giving mixed messages about like, I thought we were like all focused on this. This is what our training said, and now you're evaluating me on this one from last year, which has these elements of misalignment. So sort of looking at this, like what needs to shift and what can continue on as a strong practice. Great. All right.
We've come to our last scenario. So this is from the role of a teacher. So as one of the teachers who piloted a new ELA curriculum, I knew firsthand the potential it had to improve students' reading skills. Teachers received a thorough initial training, and many commented that although the curriculum seemed daunting, they felt set up for success for implementation. However, by October, we still found ourselves struggling to fit all the program components into our literacy block. It seemed overwhelming and there was little support. By December, some teachers had given up and returned to our old curriculum. When we came back in January from winter break, the district decided that we could use the new program as a resource rather than sticking to it faithfully. So, of course, this led to inconsistent instruction across classrooms. Some teachers used the ELA curriculum entirely. Some people use a few components of the curriculum. Some used our old curriculum materials. And some made up their own curriculum and used unvetted materials purchased from online resource websites. And so I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about like how those types of challenges can be circumvented, and talk more about like follow-up professional learning from the initial product training, which you talked a little bit about earlier when you talked about the difference between that and curriculum-based professional learning being like this Met Gala version. I love that analogy of PL. And then also, what's an example of effective learning and follow-up that Instruction Partners does, or that you've even seen in the field of professional learning?
Yeah, I definitely believe that we've got to like go and observe classrooms, because the danger is exactly what you had on that last paragraph of the previous slide, is that it just creates another inequitable structure where students don't get access to the things that they can get access to be able to learn and grow, which means we're not orienting towards the vision that we have to be true. We're only creating more barriers along the way for both students and teachers within a system because of that. And so being able to understand that progress monitoring is like this continuous support that is necessary. We're going to like plan, we're going to think about what we're looking for. If we're going to practice something, then of course I need to go into the classroom to see what exactly from our like shared learning time or our shared planning time is in action or in being implemented? And what are the barriers or breakdowns that we see? Why? To influence that whole cycle again of how we're coming into that Met Gala stitch, right? Like stitch by stitch. So I'm going to look to see you walk on the runway. Did it work right? Did we need to tailor something else a little bit better? Okay, what exactly do we need to tailor? Bite size by bite size, let's tailor that piece and then continuously move into your moving faster and stronger along the way. And so we have seen folks definitely go into classrooms like you were just talking about earlier, Jocelyn, being very specific around the observation rubric or even the look fors. Sometimes you have an observation rubric and the work that you're working on in the curriculum-based professional learning is a subset of that rubric. So I might pull out a piece of that one rubric row, create some very specific 3 to 5 look fors. Why? Because it's bite size. It allows us to be able to practice it. It allows you to be able to go implement it. It allows us to be able to observe what we have practiced. And for a teacher, that feels very low risk, but it also feels like an equitable learning experience. We did this one thing. You're going to come learn and see how I did about this one thing. And then we're going to figure out how we build upon that along the way, knowing that those 3 or 4 or 5 bite-sized pieces really fit back into that rubric so that we can continuously look at, okay, what is the next component or what is the next piece? And so that observation piece with a specific look for that is shared before we start walking into classrooms with teachers and ideally used in the preparation time is one way that we've seen districts not only like support the follow-up, but just be even more intentional about that. And it takes it off of feeling so overwhelming at a time because we all know that curriculum is daunting to implement. Like this is a challenging thing to do. It's not as easy as folks would like make it out to seem. And so being able to have to be able to be focused in what we want to do and how we want to implement and be able to look at that is something that's really important. So you'll see some of the resources that we have down here is just our sample observation and feedback tracker and some of our guides that we have for our look fors, our classroom look fors, because if we're planning and we're thinking about the implementation, it should impact kids, which means we're thinking about kids experiencing, right? Back to that vision, what kids experience inside of the classroom is the focus and how we develop teachers to be able to have those learning experiences, to provide those experiences. Those are the systems and conditions that we want to make sure we are prepared for.
Cool.
Sorry, I get a little excited about that one, and so I start to ramp a little bit.
Well, I feel like that sort of this one is the high stakes one. You see how high stakes it is in that example that Jocelyn shared. That this how high stakes it is that like this can actually lead to the curriculum being abandoned in the first year. Like how essential this ongoing support is to ensuring that this incredibly expensive investment that you make in high quality instructional materials actually sticks around. Wonderful. All right. Well, those were our 4 pitfalls that we've dug into. So I think we have time now for some questions. And before we, well, people think if they have any questions, Jocelyn, do you want to talk a little bit about next month's Power Hour?
Yeah, so for next month's Power Hour, we will talk with NERN, which is the National Implementation Research Network, who we collaborated with to do a validity study on our PLPG rubric, formerly known as the Scoring and Evidence Guide. And so we will share some of the highlights from that research and some of the changes that we made for those who are interested. And so that is next month, I believe, on the 19th, Claire, September 19th.
Oh, I should know that. It's the 3rd Thursday of the month.
Yeah, always the 3rd Thursday of the month for the PL Power Hours.
Great. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I feel like Jocelyn and Shama, you just hit it out of the park. No questions today, but I really want to just say thank you again for everyone for joining us today. And one question. This was for us. How do we subscribe to updates on Power Hours and other Rivet information? Love that question. We have a new website, as Jocelyn previewed a little bit. So if you go to our new website, we have a connect button at the top. And you can subscribe to get updates from us, including ones about the monthly Power Hours. So you never miss a Power Hour. Yes, great. All righty. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.